We are starting a new sculpture today, and I'm using the same boards. If you're curious how I use my boards, it's just a piece of wood with two pieces of wood on the side. That way you can grab it, because a lot of water clay is heavy, so it tends to make it much easier to do this. And then on top, I have a plastic bag, and I just taped it. The reason that is because that way water will not seep into the wood and warp it and change it. And we're gonna get started. Today we're gonna do a reclining pose. It's gonna be kind of like a quick pose because I need, after the holidays and Christmas, I haven't been doing a lot of sculpture. The last thing I sculpted is this, and this thing's been giving me a hard time. It's just like a little rabbit, but I kind of like it, and I'll probably make a mold of this. Nice bag of clay. It's called Virginia Red, but it really depends on the location where you live. I get this locally, and it's about $30 for 2 bags of 25 pounds each. I use my wire tool to cut slices for the base. I don't like to build my sculptures directly, like on a wood base. This will have control of your sculpture. I like to draw in where the surface, the middle of the figure, and I put down the line. And I'm using some old clay. This old clay is from the previous sculpture, and normally I like to have fresh clay and just cut large geometric chunks and add it. It saves you a whole lot of time. If you have a fresh bag of clay, I would use that to put in the majority of the figure almost right away. I always use very large tools in the beginning. One of my favorite tools is a paint scraper that you would get at any hardware store. And I got the reference from online. It's from femaleanatomicalartist.com. It is really good. There's also another website called postspace.com. I think those guys have the highest quality photos for sculptors available. At this point, it's starting to materialize. You can see I'm adding clay slowly to the back, and I'm simply trying to sculpt and keep it under the size I want. It's a lot easier to add clay than to remove it. I'm putting in the head because I will be taking measurements from the head, comparing it where it hits along the body for anatomy and proportion. Sculpture is not like drawing that you hold up a pencil and measure the head. You can take your calipers and measure the head, but often that measurement is not exactly right. So you have to use your best judgment. Now I'm sculpting along the leg. I'm looking for where the top of the leg is, but I also like to keep everything nice and flat, and that's where the paint scraper comes in handy. It keeps things geometric. I think one of the things I don't like about contemporary sculpture is oftentimes people round things too much. Sculpture, it tends to have these points of rest and flatter surfaces that make it a little bit more geometric, and I like that a lot about sculpture. Figure out where the foot and the foot underneath is. You have to imagine the tibia and the fibula going underneath the other leg. That way you have this continuous leg. I've seen people sculpt before, and it seems as if they completely forget and where the knee is and where the foot is. They're not aligned. So you want to look from the very top of your sculpture down to make sure that those bones are actually connected. It can ruin your sculpture if you do not look around. I have my reference directly in front of me, and you can see me like once in a while glancing up at the monitor, and I have everything easy to access. You don't have to use a monitor, you don't have to use a computer, you can print them out, and you can have everything up on the wall. It's exactly the same thing. I have to keep emphasizing to keep your edges flat. Don't get carried away with doing details. Details will come in as you progress with the sculpture. Also keep in mind that when the figure is resting on a hard surface, as this one is, a little bit of the fat pads and the muscles are going to bulge out a little bit. So you have to keep that in mind. And also, when you have, say, the arm connected to the base, don't just blend it to the base. You have to kind of indicate that there's some weight on the actual figure. If you just blend everything to the base, as I've seen a lot of people do, it tends to look like it's putty. It doesn't look like it's naturalistic. This is a very important thing to suggest. It's the S curve of the spine. And you can keep going towards the sacrum. Exaggerate this line and it'll keep your sculptures a little bit more dynamic. There is no point of keeping your sculpture exactly the same way you would have your reference or your model. You can exaggerate things. Unless you're getting paid to create a lifelike portrait of a model, there is no point. You want to try to create things a little bit more idealistic. So here's the navel. That's a good reference point. The line between the abs, the abdominals, is called the linea alba, and it's a line that you see more often on models that don't have a lot of fat. But if they do have fat, you'll see that linea alba underneath the navel going to the pubis. I just love working with water clay. It's the closest thing to painting that a sculptor has. If you start carving wood, if you start carving marble, it's completely different. This really is the most pure way of sculpting clay. The terracotta without any armature inside. When you look at old masters and you look at their terracottas, it's as if you're learning a whole lot more than looking at the marbles, because terracotta is like the drawing of a sculptor. It's a glimpse into their mind and in their working knowledge of a figure. I urge you to look at the terracottas from Canova and Bernini. The good thing about this low fire clay is that it fires at low temperatures, typically between 1800 to 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 980 to 1150 degrees Celsius. A lot of people have asked me, can you put this clay in the oven? And the answer is no. Your ovens in a house don't fire to this sort of temperature. That's why you need a kiln or a way to fire it. You can build your own kiln. It could be wood fired, you can dig a pit. There's many ways to do it. But I love working with this sort of thing because you get a final product at the end, as opposed to oil-based clay where you have to make a mold. And it's so painterly to use it. You're using various tools, you can create something that's very lively. It's got a lot of plasticity. The terracotta is known for its plasticity, meaning it is easily molded and shaped well when it's wet. This allows sculptors to create intricate details and dynamic forms. The clay can be coiled, pinched, or slab built, depending on the sculptor's preference technique. And terracotta is very distinct based on the area that you get the clay. It could be reddish brown, or it could be white, it could be gray. Sculptors really appreciate the warm and earthy tones that result from working with this sort of red clay. It's a natural color that can influence the overall aesthetic of the finished piece relatively quickly compared to some other types of clay. This can be an advantage for sculptors who want to progress through different stages of their work without waiting long periods between sessions. So when I'm working on some details, I can let the clay completely dry to a bone-hard type of dryness. Clay, much like I would do a wood sculpture. Of course, there is that firing process that you have to do. If you look for a ceramic place, you can fire this. So I'm putting in some of the vertebrae, and you can see I just put like a couple of dots of clay, but then using the bristle brush, I simply just go over it and tone it down. You don't want to be, it can't be a pattern. You know, when people talk about how can I sculpt hair, they're really thinking too much as far as like the strands of hair. You want to clump it together. You want to make sure that it's in a very distinct shape, and including the vertebrae. Yeah, terracotta has long been in history in art and sculpture. In ancient civilizations such as the Greeks and Romans used terracotta extensively for creating pottery and sculptures. And working with this material can provide a connection to a rich artistic tradition. So using just a rough burlap or shop towels as I do, you can get rid of a lot of the imperfections, but just look how beautiful the clay is. You can create so many types of distinct patterns. Don't be forced into smoothing things out. Don't be afraid of letting individual marks of your tools be part of the finished sculpture. Terracotta's got a lot of advantages, but it also presents some challenges. It can be more prone to cracking during drying times and the firing stages compared to some other clays. And sculptors often need to be mindful of the drying process and may use specific techniques to minimize the risks of cracking, such as hollowing out the insides of the sculpture. I like to use these bristle brushes and the silicone tools. They are almost contrasting tools. I can use the silicone to create these very flat edges and then go over it with the bristle brush when I want to diffuse things. Anything coming to the surface that resembles bones, I like to use the silicone tools. It creates a different texture. And the thing is, when you fire it, it will come to the surface at the end. So it's very important. And I'm not trying to create crazy detail. I merely want to suggest a little bit about the sculpture. It's very much like reading a novel. You don't need pictures for a novel. Your mind just kind of instinctively fills in the story. It's the same thing with sculpture. Bristle brushes can create a variety of textures on the surface of the clay. And by brushing the surface, you can achieve a subtle variation in pattern. You add depth and interest to the sculpture. This is particularly effective in representing a different material or elements within the artwork. And this is especially important for classical work. And using the brushes, the muscles of the contours of the figure a whole lot better. The bristles can be manipulated to follow the natural lines of the form. They help accentuate or soften specific areas. This technique is valuable for figurative sculptors, where anatomical accuracy and expressive detail are essential. This part gets often neglected. The form hitting the base, you have to keep in mind that you really want to zoom in and look on the inside. I'm leaving the arc of the waist because I like to see through the figure. I think it looks great, especially on a model like this one. She's very athletic, not a lot of fat, so you're going to be able to see through her because she's putting a lot of weight on that left arm and she's twisting her rib cage just a little bit. In this specific part, you're going to rely on very small tools to get into the eyes and the nose. And you can see just going over with various tools creates a little bit more depth. And I love the textures that it creates, but I'm not trying to create texture per se. What I'm trying to create with a lot of this is a variety of line. In drawing, you want to vary your line quality. It's the same thing in sculpture, except you use the form. Looking closely, you can see the grog in this type of clay. It's fired particles and silica within the clay body, and what this does is that it helps firing. Without this, the clay is a whole lot more elastic and it's better to sculpt with, but at the end of the day, you're better off having grog because it helps the firing process and your sculptures. As you approach completion of your sculpture, you're going to have to rely on these smaller tools. The best tools that I've found are these dentist tools, but I rely a lot on other tools like the silicones for adding various details. And I keep going back and forth. I'm never happy with my details, so I keep moving things around. But you can see how easy it is to mold and create various shapes with the clay. One of the things I try to do is just push and pull. Don't create lines unless it's for the variety of line. But if I create a crease, I try to create a shape for the crease and not just a line that cuts through the figure. So if you want to blend two muscle groups together, your best bet is to use your shop towel or your bristle brush to blend the muscles together. But that is after you completely finish doing the figure. At this point, I'm trying to create the various shapes for the muscles and even the fat. Sometimes my favorite part of sculpting is doing the little details. And what I'm doing here is like variety of line. I want to create some interest within the form and not make it this kind of very smooth type of sculpture that you would see in an oil-based clay. Water-based clay is not robotic. What I like about it is that it looks like a human made it. Oil-based clay, on the other hand, if you look at my previous sculptures, it tends to be very strict, very firm, and very robotic. Water clay is the complete opposite, and it's something that I really love about water clay. One of the things that a lot of models in online reference have is short hair, and I decided to change this hair and give her a little bit more flowing hair. You have to be careful because the head is at a different hardness. So you want to take nice soft clay and push it in really well and make sure that the hair adheres to the previous layer. Make sure your clay gets nice and wet and then add it. Long hair looks really good, but I think a lot of the times models put their hair up is so they show the neck because it is a very beautiful thing to see, especially if you're an artist, as you want to create that S curve of the figure. What I'm doing here now is creating a necklace, and I wasn't sure what to put in the hand. I was going to put a dagger, which would be pretty interesting, but I decided to do a crucifix for some reason. At first, I thought maybe a dagger would be more appropriate. Maybe it could be that she killed herself, but I decided against it. This is another thing that I decided is adding drapery. I love doing drapery studies, but often my sculptures get flagged on YouTube, which I often don't care, but I have so many sculptures with a lot of nudity that I decided perhaps this time I'm going to drape or at least have a little section of drapery on the sculpture. And it's very difficult sculpting drapery. You should use your own drapery and then put it over a model so you can really see. And what I did is I draped some drapery over a stool that I had, and that was enough for getting started. I still want to show the two thighs, so the drapery is kind of going to go a little bit on the inside and then come back towards the platform. On YouTube, I've been hit with a couple of 18 plus type of warnings from YouTube because they think I'm doing some pornography type of sculpture. And this is something that I've noticed. If you do erotic art, it's completely frowned upon. But artists that are dead, such as Igor Schiele or Gustav Klimt, that have done erotic work, people, the same people that hate my sculptures, they love those guys, which is very interesting. I've always thought that it was very hypocritical how some people love old masters that do erotic art, but if you do erotic art and you're still living, they completely hate you. Not that I'm comparing myself to any of these great masters. Also, keep in mind that I've gotten a lot of criticism for the type of sculptures and showing nudity in my sculptures. And that's something that, as an artist, you should not be really that concerned because the subject matter of various artists is very different from artist to artist. You should concentrate, at least in my opinion, on things such as technique, such as anatomy, things that are you can really criticize because if it's a subject matter, it's really not that worthwhile. I can see people who are not into art criticize my artwork for being too sexual, but I find it puzzling to hear that from artists. I wanted to add something, another element, and those are going to be foot shackles. It's not a theme of Andromeda, but it is kind of like the sacrificial type of motif that I do like as well. And chains are very difficult to sculpt, but it's intertwining links that are put together. Hopefully, it'll come out. Now, for the shackles, I'm going to create some different interests. I don't want to just create like a flat surface, so I'm going to add a little bit more to it. So using the dental tool, I'll try and create a different ring around the shackles just for interest. If you notice the detail up close, I don't have a lot of detail, or at least it's not very crisp detail. It's very much like a painting. When you step back from the painting, it all should come together. Now I'm sculpting a little bit of the shackles, and I draped some drapery over the stool, and now I'm arranging the drapes just a bit. I need to invest in some really good drapery because good drapery, different fabrics, adds a whole lot to the sculpture. You can wet your sculpture. There's been some artists that wet their drapery so it creates a heaviness to the actual folds, which looks so much better. If you look at old antique Greek sculptures, they have that look as if the drapes are much higher quality and are much heavier. So at this point, I'm just adding some of the details of the drapery because I want to finish this sculpture up. And this is something I want to do more is drapery studies. And you can see my studio, it's quite a mess, but just having the drapery in front of you, it makes all the difference. It also helps to have drapery that is gray and not white, just so you can see the values a little bit simpler. White sometimes is a little bit on the harder side. Now I'm going to add some detail to the shackles and to the chain. And remember, I'm not trying to do crazy detail. I'm just simply going to suggest various things. There's other artists that do a photorealistic sort of style. I'm not really into that, but using the bristle brush, try to create or remove everything that looks like it's a mistake, including the edges. A lot of times people completely forget the edges of their sculptures. Even the platform, try to create a bevel all around your underside of your base. And now let's just finish putting in the little details of the drapery and the hair, and we are almost done with this. This is the final sculpture. It took a while. It's been the holidays, the Christmas holidays, so that's usually a little bit more difficult to work on the sculpture without interruption. But this sculpture, I started out with a nude sculpture and then I draped it. You know, now I'm like looking at it, I'm thinking, did I make that the right decision? Normally, I don't care too much about showing all sorts of nudity. It doesn't bother me. And I wanted to do a little drapery study. That's why I did this. In the future, I'm probably going to be doing a couple of drapery studies. I really love how drapery looks, and I do need to practice that. That's a really good sculpting from life type of exercise. If you put up some sort of cloth and then sculpt that, it looks great. And I've done a lot of drawings of drapery. It's very important in art. If you look at sculpture from the past, there's always some element of drapery, so it's very important to learn it. What I'm going to be doing with this is letting it dry. Technically, I've already hollowed out the inside. I didn't show it on video, but if you look at my old videos where I hollow out the sculptures, that's pretty apparent how I do it. If you look at the main chunk here, I hollowed it out. I connected it through here, all the way to the head and all the way to the base. So that's going to give me a venting when I fire it. But when this becomes leather hard, I will turn it upside down and just take some of my scraping tools and dig out a little bit more, because this is quite heavy. And you use quite a bit of clay for this. The water clay is cheap, abundant, you can find it everywhere. But it is quite a bit of clay that you use for it, because I don't have an armature inside. It's like just solid, and now it's hollow inside. So this is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next sculpture. Stay tuned.